Thank you very much. Now I want to move on to the fourth speaker from the proposition side, Brian Moore.
Bonjour and merci. Thank you all for being here. We know it's been a while. So we'd also like to thank everyone for showing up, and we also like to point out that in order for you to have a culture, which is getting into our main argument, there has to be some sort of shared similarities between people within a country. So I'd like to ask a question to begin today's debate. Do you think I came from the same world, much less the same culture, as people like Sarah Palin? And the answer is clearly going to be no. But getting on to the idea of Thanksgiving, which has come up in multiple times in today's debate. Our opponents seem to believe that Thanksgiving brings everyone to the same table. And this is clearly not true. For example, Native Americans and Indians really don't perceive Thanksgiving the same way as predominantly white families. Yes. There's a lot of land that used to belong to them that white families now have Thanksgiving on. So, for example, I bring my drunk uncle to Thanksgiving, while the Indians, for example, cry lost tears. So there's a huge difference between these two predominant groups in America. Now, they then bring up the idea of symbols, and the idea that because we have symbols, you must necessarily have a culture. So to begin with, of course, America has a lot of expressions. So does France, so do many other areas. But what do these expressions actually mean? And that's really key here. Because all countries have a flag and have a song, but culture should be based upon deeper shared values. These symbols should mean the same thing to different people. So let's talk about the Statue of Liberty, which is a symbol of immigration and the greatness of America. Then you look at illegal immigrants. Sort of different there, particularly Republicans who hate illegal immigrants in Congress. And in that case, the Statue of Liberty means something far different to them than a liberal person who believes that our borders should be opened up to the poor, degenerate masses of Mexico. And in that regard, the symbol does not mean the same thing for different people, and the fact that at that point, the symbol merely means that America exists. We think the existence of something isn't enough to give it a culture. That's simply unreasonable. But then, they talk about ideals. And here's key. If you have shared ideals, yes, you have a culture. But they talk about, for example, democracy. Number one, it came from Greece. Number two, every symbol, liberal democracy in the world has some sort of democracy. This is not unique to America. It's not differentiated from other areas. But you seem to disagree.
Yes, can't you adopt part of a given culture and make it your own?
That's absolutely the case, and as I'm going to prove to you later, this isn't happening because we have rising income inequality, rising segregation, and we have people less likely to engage with others than at any time in the past. So they then talk about, for example, how in America we do have a democracy, and I'll get to later. And because we have democracy, this means that we must necessarily have a culture. But do we really have a democracy in America? So I personally like to believe that everyone can get out and vote. But unfortunately, people in low-income areas have to wait 5 times longer to vote than people in high-income areas. Is that really a democracy? And I'll take you in 1 second. Secondarily, we have individuals in certain areas who are effectively controlled by moneyed interests, in that we right now allow a huge influx of cash into the American democracy. And at that point, it's not really a democracy, it's more of an oligopoly. So even their ideals don't hold up in reality in the real world. But I'll take your question.
On that point, it doesn't matter whether they hold or not. They are ideals, so it isn't what matters whether they believe it or not.
Okay. So generally, I like to default to things that exist. They can believe in their ideals, but if those ideals aren't rooted in reality, then it's absurd to say that it defines American culture, because at that point, you're defining culture by something imaginary. But with that, let's then talk about American entrepreneurs, and how they say that the American dream is really pure. So first of all, if you're talking about materialism here, I'd like everyone in the audience who has an iPhone to raise your hands. I think we all want, okay, you may not because you're all French, but that's fine. You are and you are French, so I appreciate it. But we think, for example, everyone everywhere wants more money, wants it all the time. Capitalism is not unique to America. It doesn't define America as opposed to other nations. That is simply absurd. And then we know that we actually get things like oil and other materials from all other countries. Everything I own was made in China. Finally, let's talk about how the American dream is dead because of rising income inequality at its highest level ever and the increase in the impoverished amount of people. But with that, I'm going to give you our third independent argument about the increasing ethnic segregation of America. So people in America define their sense of culture from their ethnic background and family histories rather than their existence within the country. And we already talked about the difference between a salad bowl and a melting pot. But there's a reason why people are segregating themselves, specifically within America, more so than they ever have in the past. First of all, this may come as a shock to you, a lot of Americans are really racist. Talk to my grandpa. But with that, we say that this racism caused individuals to disengage from larger society. And this is why, for example, Mississippi recently signed the 13th Amendment, which prohibits slavery, for the first time last month. That's a little absurd. That's indicative of the fact that racism still exists. But secondarily, individuals prefer the company of those from a similar background. For example, I prefer the companies of drunks because I'm Irish. So at that point, we have a system set up where individuals are not going to be engaging and promoting the dialogue that they talk about as fundamental to having a culture. And finally, the third point is that right now, schools in America are more segregated today than they've been in decades. And people are locked in dropout factory high schools, therefore increasing inequities. And at that point, differences between these groups have become more and more severe, and differences cannot define a culture. And thus, we are proud to propose.